This is the greatest discovery in the history of paleontology. We went to Alaska a few months ago with scientists from around the world, scientists from Oxford, and just these were men who were willing to look at the science. So I went to scientist after scientist, ended up talking to about 100 people on the cruise. So I said, I'd like to show you photos from science journals of an animal, and I'd like you to guess, if you could, what animal do you think they're from? And, you know, they couldn't guess that these are from a Tyrannosaurus rex. These are blood vessels and blood cells from a T-Rex in soft, inflexible, transparent tissue. And so I asked, how could it be that there is soft tissue if these bones are supposed to be tens of millions of years old? What I found was interesting.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No.
She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone.
Well, let's say you took a steak and you wrapped it, you hermetically sealed it, you put it in your refrigerator. I mean, try freezing a steak for 10 years. Take it out, you're gonna see it looks haggard. It's had a rough time in that refrigerator.
So you see this and you think, what? You
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, you know, I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
Look at that.
Blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science, that organic material can't possibly survive even 1,000,000 years, let alone 68 million.
Now this has major implications for the age of Earth and fossils. If soft tissues in dinosaur bones are the norm, and that is what we are predicting, then these bones cannot be 65 million years old because they're loaded with soft tissues. These break down quickly, and so they can't be old at all.
These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80-million-year-old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid,
Let's put this under the scope here.
well, look.
Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel. You see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time.
There is, first of all, just the soft tissue itself that we could look at and with our own eyes say, is this soft, stretchy material, is it 80 million years old? Is it 68 million years old?
This is what we mean by an example of soft tissue which was collected from the Triceratops horn in Montana. I'm going to stretch it. Look at how stretchy this is. And this is full of bone osteocytes, the tiny cells that make this tissue and then impregnate it with bone mineral. And this was found 1 foot from the surface in Montana in the presence of insects, microbes, rodents, plants, and fungal bodies, and we've recovered the DNA of all of those. So this cannot hang around for millions of years in the presence of all those organisms and oxygen and water. And so this is what we're talking about by soft tissue.
Right. Then there is carbon-14, and that is huge.
If the entire Earth were one giant ball of nothing but carbon-14, which deteriorates over time, in 1,000,000 years, the entire ball, the size of the Earth, would be completely gone in 1,000,000 years. Yet they're finding carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. And I'd like to point out, for the record, that a dinosaur bone is a lot smaller than the entire Earth, yet it's still got carbon-14 inside of it. In bottom line layman's terms, though these tests, carbon dating in this case, can spit out dates all over the map in one single chunk of dinosaur bone, what it does prove by sheer virtue of having carbon inside of it is that what you are testing is not very old.
You have dinosaur DNA, and it's been published, although of course these scientists, aware that they're threatened, they're even hated, they're mocked, they say, you know, you have people being fired for the discovery of dinosaur soft tissue for publishing it. What the discovery tells someone with common sense that this dinosaur is not 68 million years old. This dinosaur is more in the range of the age of Egyptian mummies. And so these scientists, first they're in denial, then I get them to Google on their own phone, they go to the journal Nature Science, they see it for themselves, and then they're just bewildered. And they also don't understand why they never heard of it. What should we find if in fact dinosaurs are millions of years old? When we look at dinosaur eggshells, and they have, and they've looked at the amino acids, you know what they say? Contamination. Why are there all these left-handed amino acids in these dinosaur eggshells? They shouldn't be there. They should be fully racemized, 50-50. And so you have amino acids, you have DNA half-life, you have carbon-14, then you have just the basic common sense of dinosaur soft tissue where blood vessels are still transparent, flexible, they're stretchy, and when you squeeze them, blood cells come out.
If you are finding carbon-14 in dinosaur bones which contain original biological material from a dinosaur, which you have 11 universities, including Harvard, that have verified that the soft tissue being found inside dinosaur bones is in fact original biological material from a dinosaur. If you've got those two things combined, then it's impossible to argue, it's very difficult to argue, that the carbon inside the dinosaur bones is contamination.
This was presented at a Singapore American Geophysical conference, and it was presented by an international team of scientists who took 10 different dinosaurs from multiple continents, had them carbon-14 data at the world's leading labs, and they showed the results. And after the fact, the American Geophysical Union censored their paper, removed all reference from their paper, and all they said was, we are getting measurable carbon-14 from dinosaur bones all over the world.
And moreover, we have genetic and fossil evidence going back, and everything.
We have blood vessels.
4.5 billion years old.
We have blood vessels.
4 billion years old. We have many fossils that are almost 1 billion years old, and we have a tremendous amount of evidence of exactly how life evolved on Earth. And why must people reject all the knowledge we have because they insist that they're
because of dinosaur blood vessels.
Why don't you open your mind to the evidence of reality and say, look, if there is a God, the God, as Galileo once said, if there is a God, he gave us a brain. We should throw the brain out.
I'm talking about nature, science, paleontology.
You know, again, you've got a God of the gaps thing.
No God of the gaps.
We learn, our ideas evolve.
Blood vessels, Lawrence, blood vessels don't hang around for 65 million years in sandstone in Montana. Harvard has sequenced proteins.
I've been with Jack Horner in Montana and seen the fossil blood vessels.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's perfectly consistent with things that are 65 million years old.
They say, well, we don't have a problem with, we expect this to happen. We expect these materials to still be here. Based on what? Because the science of tissue decay, the science of protein decay, demonstrates, not just illustrates, I'm talking proves in a lab, a repeatable experimental proof type of background that this stuff should not last even 1 million years.
Oh, yeah, right.
Who was the person who discovered
How about the carbon-14? How about the carbon-14, Lawrence? There's carbon-14 in the mosasaur fossil that has soft tissue. Harvard has sequenced proteins from a hadrosaur. Carbon-14 can't last 1 million years, yet it is everywhere.
Could it be contaminated? I mean, you know, when you talk about anomalies, you know, you're like the people,
Yeah,
you know, who
anomalies.
tell me about UFOs, and they say, you know,
Right.
there's a UFO sighting in this.
I agree with you.
You can't tell me it didn't happen. Well, you're absolutely right. There are anomalies.
I agree with you, but these anomalies are everywhere.
Ridiculous anomalies when there's a whole
Lawrence.
basis of knowledge, which tens of thousands of scientists have worked their whole life on. Then people like you come along and say, I want to deny all that knowledge because I've decided in advance of reading anything, based on some book that was written God knows how long ago. That's closed-mindedness.
Lawrence.
That's not open-mindedness.
The anomalies are everywhere worldwide. There's carbon-14, diamonds.
Look, don't talk to me about anomalies. Talk to me about the evidence of
Well,
science.
carbon-14 decays with a half-life of 5,700
That's
years. This is the greatest discovery in the history of paleontology. I mean, indisputably. Dinosaur soft tissue, dinosaur DNA is the greatest discovery. The science world, the atheistic science world, wants to know nothing about it. They wish it weren't true. They don't want it to be true. When they hear it, they put it out of their minds.
How can anyone in the 21st century think the world is 6,000 years old and still consider themselves not a Neanderthal?
Professor Roberto Fondi is a specialist in paleontology. He teaches at the Department of Earth Sciences in the University of Siena in Italy.
You may be surprised to know that the fundamental assumptions upon which evolutionary thinking is based are not at all confirmed by paleontology. All the biological groups, from bacteria and blue-green algae to man, appear abruptly in the fossil record without any links connecting them with each other.
Why is it then that so many people believe the fossils prove evolution?
Evolution is presented to grown-ups and taught to the very young as a fact that has been verified and demonstrated for so long that it is a waste of time and even ridiculous to question it. So, what is the truth of the matter? Well, there is a history book of the past, and that is the rocks and the fossilized remains in them. So, it is up to the paleontologist to read that book and give the answer.
And what do you read in that book, Professor?
The fact is that after nearly 2 centuries of intense research, the paleontological evidence for evolutionary theory is not only rare, but highly questionable. The point is that if evolution had really happened, the evidence would be in great abundance and incontestable. The museums would be overflowing with fossils, clearly documenting the transitions between the various biological groups. Yet there are none. Moreover, there is no indication that the situation will change in the future. Those very few fossils which are claimed to show some kind of evolutionary link, such as the amphibians Ichthyostica and Simoria, the reptile Propenognathus, the bird Archaeopteryx, and the Australopithecine ape called Homo habilis are very far from conclusive.
I'll tell you. All right.
Every single bit of data. We have evidence.
The Neanderthal
evidence of civilization
Lawrence,
that are older than 10,000 years
Lawrence, the Neanderthal DNA has been sequenced.
Yeah, I know.
It's closer to you than a chimp is to a chimp within the same species of chimps. So the creationists who've been saying for decades that Neanderthals were people have been confirmed. DNA doesn't lie.
What do you mean people?
People. And so we offered Jack Horner, in fact, you could hear it, we offer him thousands of dollars to carbon-14 date their T-Rex. You guys might have other things you'd like to carbon-14 at the same time. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, I've been able to raise a little more money, so that's up to $10,000 now, that we'd be honored to give you guys if you would consider doing that test.
Well, we can't do that test. Because carbon-14 doesn't work on something like this.
Right.
Your results that you get could be all over the place.
Well, they should be infinity. It should be not datable. In other words, it shouldn't come back saying it's 25,000 years old.
Right.
It should be infinity. And he turns it down. And I say, Jack, is it not enough money? And I keep You know, first 5,000, 10,000, 20. We go up to, it costs 3,000 to run the test on 5 different specimens.
And they thought, well, it'd be logical to do this, to just go ahead and do it, even though nobody would be inclined to do it, just like nobody would be inclined to look for soft tissue inside of a T-Rex.
Well, yeah, and, you know, we're still trying to figure out what it is, what it's actually made of.
Right, exactly, whether it's hemoglobin or whatever.
Well, yeah.
Jack, is the amount too small that it's just not worth the consideration?
No, that's not it.
Okay. What if I were able to raise more money?
No, the amount of money has nothing to do with it.
So we say we'll pay the $3,000 for the test and we'll give you a $20,000 grant. We will, just for you to run the scientific test. And he's hemming and hawing and he's saying,
well, not going to help us.
Yeah. So even though it's just a scientific test, they're not asking for voodoo.
It's not actually a scientific test. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Carbon-14 dating something with soft tissue in it.
He said, I don't want to run that. Then he's finally, I'm almost pleading with him. And we aired this on the radio. We sent him a written grant offer, finally $23,000. And he said, I'll talk to Mary Schweitzer and we'll let you know. Well, they decided not to run the test. But it's somewhat mute because, for example, the mosasaur, which was just published recently, mosasaur bone with original biological material loaded with carbon-14.
And so many atheists and evolutionists now saying that perhaps...
I don't know what you mean by atheists and evolutionists.
Well, there's some people who are atheists, some people are evolutionists, some people are not.
What do you mean by evolutionists?
People who believe molecules to man evolution. Neo-Darwinism.
What do you mean? Well, as I said,
can I tell you what they're saying before
the people who accept the evidence of empirical science?
Yes,
the same people who believe the Earth is round.
Those people. Well, the president of the Flat Earth Society is a Darwinist.
Well,
they operate
fine,
today.
I'm just saying he's an idiot for being a president of Flat Earth Society.
I agree with you. See, we agree on something.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Lawrence,
and all I'm saying is there are no scientists who aren't evolutionists.
Could I make my point?
So you believe in gravity.
Could I make my point so you can tell me I'm wrong?
They're on the same level of footing.
Let me tell you what goes on in the back rooms of science. With National Academy members, with Nobel Prize winners, I have sat with them, and when I get them alone, not in public, because it's a scary thing if you say what I just said.
And it does contradict a signed statement by hundreds of scientists.
Yeah, but I told you, don't give me signed statements. That doesn't matter.
Well, they're scientists just like you are, Lawrence.
Scientists to sign a statement saying the Earth is flat. Are you going to run your show tomorrow?
No.
Saying, you know what? We don't really know the Earth is round.
No, the flat Earth guy is a Darwinist.
Decided to sign a statement.
All right.
I mean, come on.
The CMB.
Don't argue on the basis of that.
Let me ask you about the...
I say, do you understand all of this? Where all of this came from and how this happens. He's talking about evolution. Every time that I have sat with people who are synthetic chemists, they go, nope.
And so history shows that these predictions were adjusted after the fact. That's according to William Mitchell.
That's better and better ways of testing it. And the point is, don't you understand that some scientists would love to find that all the data is false? Do you know 50% of American adults think the sun orbits the Earth?
No, I don't. I don't believe that.
The National Science Foundation does that study every year. Are you going to argue to me?
I don't, Lawrence.
Hold on.
I don't believe that.
In classes, we should teach that the sun orbits the Earth because 50% of people think that.
I bet you. I bet you not one. I bet you not 1/100th. I bet you not 1/100th of 1% of U.S. medical doctors believe that. And I don't even believe the study anyway.
You can bet me all you want. I'm giving you a statistic.
Yeah, this is what James Tour said, and I promise you, this guy here would not be saying this if he weren't someone who had developed lists of things with more than 52,000 citations. He's valuable, otherwise he wouldn't even speak these words. I promise you that he wouldn't. Not in the position he's in. That's dangerous for him, and that's what he just said in the last quote. Let me quote you this one. My recent advice to my graduate students has been both direct and revealing. If you disagree with Darwinian theory, keep it to yourselves if you value your careers. Unless, of course, you're one of those champions for proclamation. I know that fire exists in some. So be ready for lead-ridden limbs. They're going to shoot at you the moment you come out and you start letting forth even a pinch of truth. He goes on. But if the scientific community has taken these shots at senior faculty, it will not be comfortable for the young nonconformist.
Mary, Jack, and their team published their B-Rex findings in a series of papers in the journal Science and were promptly attacked. Critics said their samples might have been contaminated, or that the supposed blood vessels were actually something called biofilm, a type of slime. But as Mary showed us, she's been able to replicate her findings.
Creation journals, by the way, are the best science journals in the world. But this is the Journal of Paleontology. And so when they publish that they have found original biological material in a beardworm, and this beardworm, like you said, Trey, they start up at the top, they get down to the bottom, Cambrian, and then Precambrian. This is a Precambrian beardworm. It's supposed to be 500 million years old. We should hear it. And by April 2014, the Journal of Paleontology reported that they found original soft tissue in Precambrian beardworms. This is what they claim are 530 million years old. So they look at these fossils, it doesn't matter how old they are, and lo and behold, soft tissue. I'd love for you to hear this one. Eventually, everything falls apart.
Yeah.
And so after 1 million years, you are not going to have any protein. You're not going to have collagen. You're not going to have DNA. But what we're finding is it doesn't matter how old the fossil is. If they look for soft tissue, they're going to find it. We don't mean in every fossil, but we mean you go look in a handful of fossils, you'll find soft tissue.
Here now is a piece of Triceratops bone that has been decalcified, so all the bone minerals have been removed. You can see how many of the blood vessels are here. This white area here, this is soft tissue on top of these blood vessels. So the bone is very stiff because it's fossilized, but yet there's soft tissue in here. This is about 40 power under the dissecting microscope. As I move this, you can see these soft tissues waving back and forth in the liquid. So this is impossible for these soft tissues to be here if these bones are that old. This would all be gone. But here you see the matrix of blood vessels that have all been permineralized. They're all hard rock, and yet these white areas show all of the soft tissue that is still present here after decalcification. So this is an indication that these bones are very young and not even 20,000 years old, probably much younger than that.
I'm a biologist.
Does human mitochondrial DNA evidence support the biblical time frame? So what are we talking about here? Well, let's talk about some facts. First of all, mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. They're little tiny organelles inside our cells that produce energy. They're very important for that. They're inherited maternally, so we get those from our mother, not our father. It has a circular genome, which you see there, of about 16,000 base pairs. So they have their own genome. Now, genome basically means the entire sequence of DNA, the information in that. You have a nuclear genome, which is what most people are familiar with, but you also have a genome inside each of those mitochondria. And it encodes several genes, which are important in what the mitochondria and what goes on there, as well as some regulatory region called the D loop that controls those genes. So that's just some basic facts about the mitochondria itself. Now, how is this related to the issue of a biblical time frame? Well, for that, we have to go to the mitochondrial DNA clock, a molecular clock, and don't worry, we're going to talk about that, and mitochondrial Eve, which probably a lot of you are familiar with. So first of all, let's talk about what is a molecular clock. Well, basically, it relates the time that two species diverge to the number of differences between their DNA sequences. So for example, the greater the time there is since two species diverge, the more differences you should see, because they've been on their own path for a longer period of time. But the lesser time since they've diverged, if this is a short time, this should be much more similar. There should be less differences. Now, something you need to know about molecular clocks: they are not an independent measurement of time. They are based on certain assumptions about the past. They are calibrated according to certain things. The main things that they are calibrated with is that basically assuming that the fossil record is accurate, radiometric dating is accurate, and that humans have diverged from chimps. Okay, so right away we can see there's going to be some major problems here with the assumptions they're using to sort of calibrate these clocks, to figure out how fast this molecular clock ticks, so to speak. So that's what a molecular clock is. Now, what is mitochondrial Eve? Mitochondrial Eve is the maternal, most recent common ancestor for all living humans. And she is believed to have lived around 100,000 to 200,000 years ago, based on the fossil record, radiometric dating, things like that. So basically, we all have her mitochondria. Now, this is in no way reference to the biblical Eve. The evolutionists for 1 minute do not believe there was one woman and we all have her mitochondria, but rather that one woman from a larger population of women, for whatever reason, it's her mitochondria that we all have today. And so we want to make that clear. Now, how do these two things relate? Mitochondrial DNA clock and mitochondrial Eve? Well, a man by the name of Parsons, a scientist back in 1997, published a paper where he looked at the control region, that regulatory region, of mitochondrial DNA as a molecular clock. So he was going to use that to study some relationships. And what he expected to find was that there would be one mutation every 12,000 years. That's what he expected to find. Why did he expect to find that? Because based on the fossil record, based on radiometric dating, all of those things that humans diverge from chimps, that's what they had already assumed the rate would be. But they found something very different. Now, what he was looking at was modern human DNA. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers, granddaughters, looked at 327 different generational events and found that actually the mutation rate is much, much quicker. It's one mutation every 800 years. Okay, that's orders of magnitude faster than what they ever expected. Now, that in and of itself isn't so much of a problem, but it is a huge problem for them when you apply it to human evolution. Because the problem is that mitochondrial Eve becomes 6,000 years old.
Only 6,000 years old. And I believe the Bible clearly teaches it's only 6,000 years old. And God made everything. Actually, He made the earth first in Genesis 1. And then in verse 14, He made the stars also. Evolution says He made the stars evolve first and then the earth. Well, there's certainly a lot of stars out there. Nehemiah chapter 9 says, Thou, even Thou art Lord alone. Thou hast made the heaven of heavens. God is claiming that He made them. So, either He did or He didn't. But what about the stars? How do they fit in? Astronomers kind of see a star blow up about every 30 years. It's not like it's on a timetable. It might be every 5 years, might be every 50 years, but on an average, every 30 years, a star explodes. And they're looking out there with their telescope and say, oh wow, there's a new one. A star exploded. It's called a nova. Or if it's a big one, they call it a supernova. Nova in Spanish means no-go. By the way, the Chevy Nova did not sell very well in Mexico for that reason. Hey, do you want to buy a Nova? No. Why would I do that? It won't go. But stars blow up every 30 years. Well, they've searched the heavens with these telescopes looking for how many supernova rings are there. They call it a dead star. Or they can find less than 300. Now, wait a minute. If there are less than 300 supernova rings, and one happens every 30 years, you can do the math. I mean, that's about 9,000 years. If the universe is billions of years old, there ought to be a whole lot more supernova rings out there. Why are there less than 300 supernova rings? Because it's less than 10,000 years old? Boy, they don't like that answer at all.
All right, how about molecular machines? Molecular machines. Take a look at this.
As you've probably seen this quote, according to Charles Darwin, Darwinism's dead. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight changes, my theory would absolutely break down. And of course, sort of the mascot of the intelligent design movement is the bacterial flagellum. And if you take a look at the bacterial flagellum, it's the width of an E. coli bacterium cell, which is about 1/1000th the width of a human hair. So you could line up 12,500 in an inch of these things. It has 240 distinct proteins. It has a microscopic outboard motor on its tail that runs at an incredible 100,000 revolutions per minute. This is a little motor here. And it only takes a quarter turn to stop, shift directions, and start spinning 100,000 RPMs in the opposite direction. I don't even know if we have a motor that can do that ourselves. And it's irreducibly complex. It must have been created all at once because you can't have function of a motor as it's being put together. The whole motor needs to be there at the same time in order for you to have function. Yeah, you can build a car in successive steps, but you can't drive your car when it's halfway built, right? And Ken Miller and other so-called critics of this will try and say they have a precursor to this, but they really don't. They don't have a functional precursor to this. In fact, when you look at this, if this isn't something engineered, I don't know what is. You've got a propeller, you've got bushings with L rings, P rings, you've got membranes, hooks, universal joints, you've got a rotor with an S ring and an M ring, you've got studs, a stator, you've got all this stuff, which is really an engineered creation. It's not something that could come into existence. And
can you define irreducible complexity for us so we?
Oh yeah, okay.
We see why this is so critical to the Darwinian enterprise.
An irreducibly complex system or creation, whatever it is, whatever you're talking about, has to have all the parts in working order at the right place at the right time in order to have function. The illustration that Michael Behe gives is the mousetrap, right? You've got to have all 5 parts of the mousetrap there in order to catch mice. Yeah, you could have a precursor to a mousetrap, but it wouldn't catch mice if you took some of the parts away. You need to have all the parts there in working order together at the same time in order to have function. Do you have a different definition?
No, it's just because the Darwinian model requires that each piece be added little by little, and at each stage you have increased functionality.
Yes.
With irreducible complexity, you have functionality at no stage of the building of the thing until you have the whole thing built. So when you have a bona fide irreducibly complex feature in the biological realm, there is no Darwinian way to explain how the pieces get assembled to the functional state. And what guys like Miller want to say is that there must be some functionality to the preliminary states that then leads you to this final sophisticated state we see here. But of course, there must be only if you're presuming the materialistic explanations. If you're going with the evidence as we're facing it, we are free then to just deposit the most obvious explanation, this is designed. They are not free to do that because they are restricted by their philosophical presuppositions, so they have to demand that there must be some functionality to these prior stages, and this is the demand that they force upon the argument to disqualify the conclusions of irreducible complexity.
Now, a conclusion of an irreducibly complex system is what Michael Behe takes, because he wrote the book on this, and here's what he says. He says the result of these cumulative efforts to investigate the cell, to investigate life at the molecular level, is a loud, clear, piercing cry of design. The result is so unambiguous and so significant that it must be ranked as one of the greatest achievements in the history of science. The discovery rivals those of Newton and Einstein. Now, is he just seeing what he wants to see? I'll let you decide that. Science doesn't say anything, scientists do. I think he's drawing the proper conclusion based on the evidence, but that's for you to decide.
Question.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. You want me to go back there?
There is, it's not unusual to hear people say that Behe has been completely refuted on this point. And when you look at the details, what you discover is that someone has taken an example of alleged irreducible complexity and then they have contrived an explanation, and it may be a clever explanation that is worth looking into. I'm not dismissing it. But they've contrived an explanation how that particular piece of machinery can be explained by some kind of step-by-step process in which each step has functionality.
It's a possibility, but it's not evidence.
Well, it's a possibility, and that's okay because scientists have to do that. That's part of what they do. They tell stories and then try to find evidence that the things played out the way they think they do. So I'm not faulting the process. I'm making a little different point. Let's even just say, for the sake of discussion, that they have done a convincing job of giving us a materialistic explanation to demonstrate that one alleged example of irreducible complexity is not, in fact, irreducibly complex. But then they take that to be a refutation of the entire point and every example of irreducibly complex machines in the biological realm. I've seen this time and time again. Oh, he's been completely disproved. How so? Well, because this flagellum thing, well, we found a way to explain that in Darwinian terms. So there he goes. As if the flagellum is the only example of an irreducibly complex thing. And as B.E. points out, and the people in the field know, the biological realm is absolutely littered with these kinds of things. In every single cell you see these kinds of things. And just in the replication process of the DNA and how the DNA helps make proteins, assemble proteins, there's all kinds of little machines that are involved in that process. And by explaining away one of the machines in this vast array of them, you have not defeated the argument of irreducible complexity. You've just removed supposedly one example of irreducible complexity.
You know, William Dembski makes the point that the irreducible complexity argument on steroids is the origin of life. Because for the origin of life, you need a cell, you need DNA, you need RNA, and you need proteins. And all four of those things need one another. They have to all be there together to have any of them in a living thing. DNA needs RNA, RNA needs DNA, a cell needs both of them, proteins need, they all go together. It's a classic chicken and egg problem. I mean, that's the irreducible complex problem on steroids. That's why even Dawkins will just speculate on the beginning, the origin of life. But then when you look at how life functions here, and you're trying to reverse engineer things, interesting word, reverse engineer, right? This stuff's engineered. You're trying to figure out how is it put together by randomness. I think ultimately it's futile to try and figure that out because it doesn't appear to be put together by randomness. Now, by the way, before we go into the fossil record, last thing. Can you continue to look for a natural cause for life? Yeah, you can continue to look for it if you want to. But when does a question become closed? At what point do you finally say, look, we've been looking long enough. When are we going to finally say information doesn't appear to have any natural cause? Natural forces, all the natural forces we know just create repetitive things over and over again. When are we going to finally admit that there's got to be intelligence introduced somewhere, somehow, in this process?
When every knee will bow.
Huh?
When every knee will bow.
When every knee will bow, maybe. That's it. I don't know. But based on the information we have now, the best explanation is there was intelligence put in it at some point.
And can I underscore something?
Please.
That you implied here, and this is something that Stephen Meyer makes as a very, very strong point. The task here isn't just looking around a little bit longer to see if we can find the right stuff. It has to do with the nature of the enterprise itself. Biochemical predestination is dead in the water because it can't produce information. They know that. So there's only a couple of avenues that the materialist can go, that he has at disposal to explain information, and it turns out that the nature of information itself cannot be explained by those kinds of things. And so you run into a dead end because, not because, well, I haven't yet found the little piece of information to explain it. It's because of the kinds of things that you're trying to bring together.
So could we say, Greg, in your opinion, that this is a category mistake?
Yes.
That it's not the God of the gaps argument anymore either, because nature itself can't explain immaterial realities known as
Exactly.
Okay.
You're trying to find a materialistic explanation for the existence of immaterial stuff, information, which your philosophy, first of all, can't explain how you get something immaterial from something material, but it also, your philosophy denies the existence of immaterial things to begin with.
That's right.
So it's just in principle not capable of solving this problem.
But then, just like that, the atheist could be right. That's what he's famous for saying.
That's not me. I stole it.
Was that Tom?
Yeah, that's Tom.
No, I think you're right on it. It's a different category. It's like trying to find a natural cause for all of nature. Trying to find a natural cause for information when we know information's immaterial.